Here's one of those control arms on the bench here, and we take a look at this, and it's not very thick material. And they may have designed it that way so that it would kind of twist and articulate. Maybe it'll have the vehicle ride a little better. It won't be as stiff as a ride, possibly. But here is our bushing right here, and you can see the outside of that bushing is all rotted right off, and there's the rubber inside there. So what you could do if you could find replacement bushings is you just press this whole thing right out of there, and then you put a new one in. So these bushings can be replaceable if you can find the replacements to press them out and put them back in. But you can also buy a completely new lower control arm, and that's what I've done. We're going to remove these steering arms, and we're going to disconnect all of these tie rod end connections. One on the driver's side. We have one there on the drag link off the gearbox. We've got this one over here on the passenger side. We'll likely leave that one connected because that connects to the other arm. But we are going to disconnect our steering stabilizer. And you can also see we're missing a nut on there. That can't be good. In all cases, we're going to remove the lock pin. Then we're going to remove the nut. And we'll likely put the nut, a few threads engaged on the tie rod end, and then we can use a hammer and hammer it loose if we have to get it out of there. These ones are going to be replaced anyway, so you don't need to be too fussy. You can just strike it on the end of the tie rod end. It's going to be replaced. We've removed all those rods there, and that steering stabilizer. It's the castle nuts for all of the 3 tie rod ends. Those were going to be a 3/4 wrench to remove those. Get your lock pin out first, remove those, and then that bolt that's going to hold on that steering stabilizer, that was a 15 mil on the head of the bolt, and I do believe it was an 18 mil for the nut on the back end there. Now that we have this thing removed, that one's loose, that one's loose, that one's loose, but this one surprisingly isn't that bad. It's loose, but not as bad as you would expect. It's actually got some tension left in it. But the steering stabilizer is shot. It doesn't retract or push out. It just remains in that position right there. That was probably another problem as well, because the steering stabilizer would have, as it suggests, stabilized these 2 arms while you're driving. In theory, if you wanted to go the cheapest route possible, possibly steering stabilizer might fix your problem, or a great percentage of it. The next thing to do here is we're going to replace these components with all new stuff. But now that we got that out of the way, we can get underneath there and look at some other things and maybe get some access at changing some other stuff first before we go putting this back together. Another thing to consider is removing the whole thing as I have, and then you're not adjusting anything, right? So when we put the new components in there, we want to get as close to the same length as rods as possible. Still have to take it in for wheel alignment most likely, but at least it'll be close. And then, you could, if you had to, drive it for a little bit before you got it booked in for wheel alignment. Up front here, this is the sway bar. And that's the sway bar length that's connected to the end of the sway bar here. And as you can see, our bushings are really wore out. So we're going to replace these bushings for the sway bar. When we look here, this is supposed to be the track bar. It bolts here, and then we've got another tie rod end up there. Now again, likely this thing has never been changed, and that tie rod end is going to be really loose on the other side. On this side here is a 15 millimeter to get that out. Then on the back, they just have this little keeper here. Basically fits in behind there. And this is your anti-rotation device. So that's how you can get your nut in there and get it out of there when you remove that. Over here, we're going to remove the castle nut and pin off the top of that. And then we have to separate our tie rod end from the frame there. Here's that track bar removed again on this side. It was a 15 mil to get that bolt out of there. Then we remove the castle nut and the pin on this side, and then I'm just going to use a pickle fork to get that off of there. Actually, it wasn't as bad as I anticipated. It is wore out, obviously, but it's not like really loose as I would have expected it to be. Having said that, we're going to replace all the components on the front end. I don't want to put half new stuff and half old stuff from 1997. Gonna put all new stuff in the front here, and then it's all gonna be new, stiff and new and matched suspension and steering components. Here's the upper control arm here, and on the front, that's going to be a T50 and a 15 millimeter for the nut there, and then just on the back will be a 15 millimeter both sides nut and bolt. Down inside here, I got a jack support in the frame back there, and I also have the jack support in the front axle right here, and that should hold everything secure while we're trying to remove these control arms here. We're removing the top one first, and there's a bolt in here that you access through this window, and that's going to be a 15 mil. There's the front connection on the top of the differential there, so we'll just remove those two bolts and we'll put the new one in and reinstall it. When we're installing the upper control arm there, we had to line up that bolt in the front, so just use this ratchet strap to try and pull that back so that we can line up that bolt. Worked out pretty good. And I'm just hooking that onto the back of the support for the lower control arm there. There's two little holes that you can use to fasten that in there. There you can see the two holes that I've used on the back to use that ratchet strap and pull that back. I just kind of got it wrapped around the bottom there, kind of pull, tilt that back, get that bolt in there, and I'm going to torque that up to 30 foot-pounds. Anyone interested, this is the part number that I'm using for that upper control arm there. Here's the lower control arm removed. We've got the new one in the back, we've got the old one in the front. This is the way that it comes out. You can't really get it backwards because the width on the front and the width on the back is different, so if you try to flip it around, it's not going to fit in one of the spots. It's designed that way that you can't really mix it up. It goes in one way only. You have this kind of pocket in the rubber on the front if you want that as an indicator. So that's the front end, and then the back one has the solid rubber there. When we're looking at our fasteners here, these end up being a 21 millimeter. That's both for the head and the nut. This front fastener here has this this round cam lock kind of thing on there, whatever you want to call it. There's like the slot that the bolt will go in. When you have your bolt in there for the installation, take a look at the head of the bolt, and as you rotate this, that bolt moves. So I made a mark on there, so this hole is going to line up with that mark there, and that's going to take this bolt right there, and as we turn it, then it's going to force it the furthest way that way. At least that's the way it is on mine. So always make reference marks when you're taking stuff apart so that you put it back together the same way. Here's a part that I'm using as a replacement here, if anyone's interested. Finished installing the upper and lower control arms in the front end here. And what I've done is I put some notes on there to remind me I've got a Teflon lock nut on the other side. Now the reason I did that was because in that location I had welded the nut to the framework. So it's a captive nut, so then the bolt just comes in from this side, threads in there, and because it's a captive nut, it's not the lock nut, the original lock nut that was on there from factory. So I've doubled up with a nylon locker after that. Right here you can see what I'm talking about. I've tacked that nut onto the frame, and then I've got my nylon lock nut on there just for a little extra security.